The late summer heat lay thick over the dusty town of Red Rock, where the wind rarely blew and the sun had no mercy. Clara Dawson wiped the sweat from her brow as she rang the old brass bell that signaled the end of the school day. Her students' children, of miners, ranchers, and railroad workers, scattered with the glee only young hearts can know. Clara, just 18, stood tall with quiet dignity, her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet, and her calico dress worn from use but clean and pressed. She had arrived in Red Rock barely a year ago, alone but determined to teach and make her way honestly in the world. Her mother had died of consumption in Kansas, and her father had been gunned down over a crooked card game. Clara had buried her grief beneath hard work and made a place for herself in the harsh frontier town. But no amount of strength could prepare her for what would come next. The trouble had started innocently, at least on the surface. Mayor Silas Granger, a barrel-chested man with thick white sideburns and a voice like gravel, had taken a sudden interest in Clara. At first, it was flattery. A bouquet of wildflowers left at the schoolhouse door, a new chalkboard delivered unannounced, an invitation to supper. Clara, polite and cautious, declined all advances with grace, citing her busy schedule and the impropriety of such a connection. But Mayor Granger was not a man used to being denied. He had ruled Red Rock for nearly 10 years not by fairness, but by intimidation. He controlled the sheriff, the saloon, and the freight lines. He had buried enemies and rivals alike under rumors or bullets, and he believed Clara, young and alone, would be no different. "You're a pretty girl," he told her one afternoon, blocking her exit from the schoolhouse. "You can have a good life here, a powerful life. All you have to do is say yes." "I'm here to teach children, not to be someone's possession," Clara replied, clutching her books tightly. "I'd thank you to keep your distance." Granger had narrowed his eyes then, his jaw twitching. "Be careful, Miss Dawson. This town isn't kind to women who act high and mighty." She knew then that her refusal had turned dangerous. A few days later, the annual Red Rock Social was held, a tradition where townsfolk gathered in the square for music, dancing, and shared food. Clara almost didn't attend, but Miriam, her friend and the widow of a ranch hand, had urged her to come. "You need to show your face," Miriam had said. "He's trying to scare you into hiding." So Clara, dressed in her best blue dress, pinned a sunflower to her sash, and walked into the square with her head held high. Music played, children danced in circles, and the scent of roasted pork wafted through the air. At first, all seemed normal. Then Mayor Granger approached, towering and sweating in a too-tight suit, with a silver pocket watch gleaming from his vest. He held out his hand. "A dance, Miss Dawson?" The music fell quiet. People turned to watch. Clara looked him in the eye. "No, thank you, Mayor. I don't dance with liars or bullies." A hush fell over the crowd. For one long moment, Granger's face went pale, then purple. A few women gasped. One man chuckled, but quickly silenced himself. Clara turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had crossed a line, publicly embarrassed him, made him look weak. Miriam caught up with her behind the church. "He's going to come after you now," she whispered. Clara nodded, her voice quiet. "Let him. I won't be owned by anyone, not him." But even as she spoke those brave words, fear coiled deep in her stomach. Granger didn't forget insults, and he never forgave them. That night, under a moonless sky, 2 riders watched Clara's tiny cabin on the edge of town. When her lamp went out, they crept close. One of them whispered she should have just said yes. The other replied coldly she wished she had before morning. And far from the safety of the lights and music, Clara Dawson's fate would be sealed not by her weakness, but by her defiance. But the cliffs didn't take her soul that night, because someone wild, watching, and wounded by his own scars, was waiting in the dark. Canyon below. The wind howled like a warning over the jagged cliffs of Devil's Bluff that night, sharp and bitter, as if the land itself knew what was about to be done. Clara Dawson lay in a shallow sleep, her body worn from another day of teaching, her mind uneasy from the encounter with Mayor Granger. Her small cabin, just outside the edge of town, stood quiet under the stars. Inside, everything was still. She never heard the door creak open. The first man, Paxton, covered her mouth with a rough, calloused hand. The second, Holt, pinned her arms. She fought, kicked, clawed, but their grip was merciless. They smelled of tobacco and sweat, and worse, the stink of men who believed their power was untouchable. Clara's scream was muffled, choked back into her throat. Her lamp crashed to the floor as they dragged her outside. "Told you she'd be a fighter," Holt muttered as they threw her across the back of a horse. Granger said, "No mess." "Just get it done," Paxton growled. "Quick and clean." They rode hard under the cover of darkness, leaving no tracks, no trace. Clara struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from fury. She had known men like this existed. What terrified her more was how many townspeople would pretend not to notice her absence. How many would assume she'd run off in disgrace? She looked up once, her face bloodied from the ride, and saw the pale rim of the bluff ahead. "No," she whispered, twisting. "Please don't," but the men didn't look at her. They never once said her name. At the top of Devil's Bluff, the moon finally broke free of the clouds. The drop below was steep, the rocks jagged and cruel. The river had dried to little, more than a vein of cracked earth winding through the canyon bottom. It wasn't a fall someone survived. That was the point. Paxton dismounted, yanked her off the horse, and dragged her forward. Holt followed, his eyes hollow, like this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. "No one says no to the mayor," Paxton muttered. "He built this town, fed it, protected it. He owns it," Holt added, "and everything in it." Clara's voice was raw, but her words were clear. "He may own you, but not me." She spat blood at Paxton's boot. That earned her a backhand across the mouth. The two men gripped her arms and dragged her to the cliff's edge. The sky stretched above, endless and cold. Clara fought until the last breath, trying to dig her heels into the dirt until one brutal shove sent her hurtling into the darkness. The world spun. The stars blurred. Her scream was swallowed by the night. She hit the canyon wall once, hard. Then branches. Then rock. And finally, the earth. Above, the two men stood quiet, looking down into nothing. "You see her?" Holt asked, peering into the blackness. "No." Paxton wiped sweat from his brow. "But no one's getting up from that, not even a preacher's daughter. You think he'll care? That she's just a girl?" Paxton lit a cigarette, his hand still shaking. "He didn't care when we did it to that reporter last spring. He won't care now." They turned and rode off, the wind covering their tracks. But far below the bluff, something stirred. Her body, broken. Her skin torn, face swollen. One leg bent wrong. She lay among thorns and shattered rock, a limp doll discarded by the world. Then movement. Not hers. A figure emerged from the shadows of the canyon, silent and barefoot, painted in earth and ash. The man moved like smoke, crouching beside the ruined girl without a sound. Taza. Apache warrior, son of a murdered chief, survivor of white men's betrayal, now living alone in the deep canyons where no soldier dared follow. He had been fasting in solitude, praying for purpose, seeking a sign, and now she lay before him, barely breathing, clinging to life. A white woman, a stranger. And yet he did not turn away. He pressed his fingers to her throat. Faint pulse. His Gaze narrowed. Taza knew the ways of pain. He knew the difference between someone ready to die and someone who had been thrown away, like trash. She hadn't jumped. She had been discarded, and he would not leave her behind. Without a word, he lifted her gently, cradling her broken form in his arms, and vanished into the wild. The cliffs had tried to silence Clara Dawson, but fate had other plans. The canyon was a place of ghost silent, ancient, and forgotten by time. Jagged red walls rose high above, casting shadows so deep that even the moon dared not reach them. This was no place for the living. And yet, one man moved through the rocks as if he belonged to them. Taza, the Apache warrior, carried Clara Dawson in his arms like a fragile bundle of wind. Her blood soaked through his buckskin tunic, her breath shallow and rattling. Her pale skin was streaked with dirt and bruises, and her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. She should have been dead. Any other woman would have been, but something in her had refused to surrender. Taza didn't question it. He didn't believe in coincidence, not since the night white soldiers had raided his village and left it in flames. Not since his brother died defending a mother and child who weren't even his own. Not since he walked away from the world of men to live alone beneath the earth and sky. Now, the world had brought him this broken girl. And the look in her face when her eyelids had fluttered open for a heartbeat was not one of fear, but disbelief. As if she'd never expected to see kindness again, Taza wound his way through the canyon's narrow trails, following a hidden path only he knew. Up a slope, through a break in the rock, to a small cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside was warmth, a fire pit, a pallet of furs, bundles of dried herbs, and clean water stored in goatskin bladders. It was a place made for solitude until now. He laid Clara gently on the furs and began his work without hesitation. First, he cleaned her wounds. He crushed wild willow bark for the pain and soaked it into her cracked lips. He washed the blood from her face with water warmed by the fire, careful not to disturb the deep gash on her temple. Her leg would need setting. He wrapped a thick strip of deer hide between her teeth, then whispered in Apache for the spirits to be gentle. With swift, sure hands, he yanked the bone back into place. Clara screamed, but it was a faint, cracked sound. Then she fell into unconsciousness once more. Taza covered her with a thick fur and sat at the cave mouth, keeping watch. His eyes remained sharp, but his mind wandered. He did not know her name or why she had been thrown from the cliff. But he knew enough to see this was no accident. No misstep. She had been discarded like a threat. He had seen it before. The powerful feared the tea, innocent especially the ones who wouldn't bow. That night, the wind changed. The coyotes howled in the distance, and the stars blinked cold above. Taza did not sleep. He listened to her breathing, shallow but steady, and stoked the fire every hour. As dawn broke over the canyon rim, Clara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, bleary, unfocused. The pain hit her all at once. She gasped, crying out, then tried to sit up. Her hands trembled. Her throat felt raw. "Easy," Taza said, his voice low and calm. "You are safe." She blinked, trying to make sense of his face, dark skin painted with ochre, long black hair tied behind his back, eyes like burning coals, sharp and still. "Who?" Her voice cracked like a dry twig. "I am called Taza," he said simply. "You were near death. I found you." Clara's memory came rushing back in fragments. Horses, rough hands, the fall. Then blackness. Her eyes widened in terror. The cliff. You did not fall. You were thrown." Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes, the truth crashing over her like a wave. Then, slowly, she looked at him. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question half a whisper. Taza did not answer right away. He reached into a pouch and pulled out a piece of Honeycomb, offering it to her. Because the world is full of men who destroy, he said. Someone must learn to rebuild. Clara's hand shook as she took the honeycomb dot. The sweetness surprised her dot, and for the first time in days, she tasted something other than fear. For the first 2 days, Clara drifted in and out of a fevered sleep, tangled in dreams of falling in blood, of Mayor Granger's sneer and the sickening moment her feet left the ground. But each time the nightmares took her, she awoke to the same thing: warmth, a soft blanket of fur, the scent of smoke and cedar, and the steady, silent presence of the Apache warrior who had saved her life. Taza never asked her name. He simply tended to her like she mattered. He ground herbs with a smooth river stone, steeped them into bitter teas, and coaxed her to sip them. When she vomited from the pain, he held her upright. When she sobbed, half from agony, half from shame, he said nothing. He simply sat nearby, still as stone, offering her the one thing no man in Red Rock ever had: dignity. By the third morning, Clara was strong enough to whisper her name. "Clara Dawson," she rasped, her voice dry as the canyon wind. Taza nodded once, as if he had already known. "Clara," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "You are not dead yet, Clara Dawson." She gave a weak smile. "I suppose that's something." He didn't smile back. "It is everything." That day, Taza began teaching her. He started small, showing her how to sit up without aggravating the wound in her leg, how to roll her ankle against a flat stone to regain strength. She watched, quietly fascinated, as he mixed salves from crushed desert plants, creosote for infection, yucca root to clean the skin. His hands were deft, his movements economical, precise. Clara, who had been raised with books and prayer, had never imagined healing could come from the earth itself, but here it was. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked once, as he adjusted the splint on her leg. Taza didn't look up. "My mother." Before the soldiers came. She didn't press further. His voice, when he mentioned his past, turned brittle like dry bark that could crack under too much pressure. In return, she told him of Kansas, of her parents, of how she taught reading and sums to children who barely owned shoes, and how that had given her a purpose. Taza listened in silence, occasionally nodding, his gaze always on the fire or the canyon beyond. "I didn't think I'd ever speak to anyone again," she confessed one evening. "Not after what they did. I thought ... I was ruined." He turned toward her, his eyes catching the firelight like obsidian. "You are not ruined. They tried to break your body, but your spirit still fights." Clara blinked back tears. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with pity. Not with lust. Just ... truth. Later that night, as she lay on the fur pallet, listening to the wind whisper through the canyon cracks, Clara stared up at the stone ceiling above and whispered, "Why me?" She meant it as a prayer. Maybe even a curse. But Taza answered from across the fire, "Because the earth doesn't always choose who is strong. Sometimes it chooses who must become strong." By the end of the week, Clara was hobbling on a carved walking stick, her body bruised but regaining life. She had traded her blue dress ripped and bloodied for a soft tunic of deerskin Taza had offered her. It fit loosely but comfortably, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was wearing a costume for someone else's approval. One morning, as the sun filtered into the canyon, Taza placed a small knife in her hand. "For protection," he said. Clara stared at it, then looked up at him. "You think they're coming back?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That same day, he took her deeper into the desert. He taught her how to move silently across stone, how to recognize mountain lion tracks, how to find water in the roots of a cactus. They spoke little, but something unspoken began to bloom between them, something fragile and aching and real. Clara watched him often when he wasn't looking. The way he moved like part of the land itself. The way he never flinched from hard things, setting traps, cleaning wounds, facing pain. She realized he was not just a warrior. He was a man carrying his own ghosts. She wanted to know them. But first, she had to face her own. Because healing wasn't just about the body. And Clara Dawson wasn't content to hide in a canyon forever. She was alive. And soon, she would make the men of Red Rock wish she wasn't. Back in Red Rock, the town's silence was louder than any gunshot. Days had passed since Clara Dawson's disappearance, but few dared to speak her name. Those who had seen her confront Mayor Silas Granger at the social remembered her defiance. All too well. And they knew what that kind of defiance cost in a place like Red Rock. Her little schoolhouse sat abandoned, its bell unmoved. The children whispered rumors. She ran away. The mayor sent her east. She got sick and died. None of them knew the truth. But the adults? Most of them had seen enough over the years to guess. Miriam Brooks, Clara's closest friend, watched the town with growing dread. A widow in her mid-20s with sharp instincts and a heart too kind for her own good. Miriam had seen this pattern before, how women went missing and men turned blind. She'd lost a sister that way. And now Clara was gone too. She stood at the general store, gathering mail and supplies, when Sheriff Bill Hodges approached. He was a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and a badge that had long since lost its meaning. "Still no word from your friend?" he asked, a forced calm in his voice. Miriam turned sharply. "No. Have you even looked for her?" we asked. "Around," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. "No one saw anything after the social. Likely she ran off in shame." "Shame?" Miriam's voice cracked like a whip. "You mean after turning down the mayor in front of the whole town?" Few passers-by turned their heads. The sheriff frowned. "Careful now, Miriam. Don't stir up trouble." Miriam stepped closer. Someone should. Because Clara didn't just leave. She wouldn't abandon her students. She wouldn't vanish without telling me. He lowered his voice. "I'm warning you. Let it go. You know how this town works." She stared at him a long moment. "That's the problem. I do." In the saloon that night, Mayor Granger sat at his usual table, sipping whiskey from a heavy glass. His boots were propped on the table, and his mood was smug. He wore a new coat, black wool with silver buttons, and a fresh shave, as if to wash the guilt from his face. Paxton and Holt were there too, keeping quiet but close. No one said a word about the girl. No one asked where she'd gone. The mayor spoke of cattle contracts, rail expansion, and upcoming elections. The men around him nodded, laughed, raised their glasses. As long as their pockets stayed full, their consciences stayed clean. But not everyone bowed. An old rancher named Caleb, too drunk to remember his place, muttered something about the Dawson girl. Granger's eyes turned to ice. "What was that?" he asked, voice flat. Caleb blinked. Confused. "Just, she was a good teacher. Shame she left." Granger stood slowly. The room fell quiet. "She left because she wasn't made for this place," he said. "Weak hearts can't handle the West. Now raise your glass or get out." No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was its own kind of violence. On the outskirts of town, Miriam sat alone on her porch, oil lamp flickering at her side, staring out into the night. In her lap was a small leather-bound journal. Clara's. She had taken it from the schoolhouse before the mayor's men came snooping. Inside were pages of Clara's neat handwriting, lesson plans, and poems. But tucked in the back, behind a folded page, was a list. A list of names. All women. Each with a note beside them, left town. Drowned, married, and disappeared. Miriam's heart raced. She'd seen this before. Clara hadn't just been afraid for herself. She'd been digging, looking for a pattern. And now Miriam saw it too. Every woman who had crossed Granger or simply rejected him had vanished. No one had ever dared to ask why until Clara until now. Miriam lit another lantern and set it in the window, the flame bright against the dark. It was a signal. One Clara had taught her when they first became friends. If I disappear, don't let them forget me. Miriam wouldn't. Not this time. And miles away. In the canyon, Clara trained. She stood on one leg, braced against a branch for balance, her splinted leg trembling with effort. Taza watched from nearby, silent but approving. The pain was sharp, but her eyes were sharper. I need to go back, Clara said, gritting her teeth. Not now. But soon. Taza nodded once. Then we prepare. Because the town had buried the truth, and Clara Dawson was done staying buried. Clara had always been clever with books, grammar, arithmetic, history, but nothing in her past life prepared her for the lessons she was learning now. The canyon had become her classroom. And Taza, the Apache warrior who saved her life, was her teacher. Each day began with the sun's first light stretching across the sandstone walls. The moment Clara could bear to stand, Taza began her training. He was patient but unyielding, his instructions stripped of comfort or indulgence. She'd asked him once why he didn't speak much while teaching. Words can lie, he said, but your body never does. The first lessons were simple: how to listen. Close your eyes. He told her one morning as they sat on a ledge overlooking the dry riverbed. What do you hear? She frowned, concentrating. The wind. What else? A bird. He nodded. Where? She pointed left. Wrong. Hawk is behind you. She opened her eyes, surprised, and heard it clearly now. The screech echoed off the canyon walls, not ahead of her, but far behind. You must hear everything, he said. The wind, the earth, your own heart, especially your fear. Listen to it, but do not obey it. She didn't say anything, but the words settled into her chest like seeds. Later, Taza showed her how to move without sound. Clara limped less now, though her legs still ached when she put too much weight on it. He gave her soft leather moccasins and showed her how to walk toe first across stone and sand, to use shadows, to feel with her feet before committing her full step. They practiced in silence, weaving through narrow canyon corridors like ghosts. Once, she slipped and caught herself against the rock wall. Taza raised an eyebrow. Would have been heard 2 ridges away. Clara grinned through her sweat. Then it's a good thing I'm not sneaking up on anyone yet. Soon, he sighed. You will. By the 4th week, Taza placed a bow in her hands. It was smaller than his, light enough for her to draw, but still powerful. She'd never held a weapon before. Her hand shook at first, but Taza guided her fingers until the string felt familiar. He taught her to notch, draw, breathe, and release. The first few arrows flew wild. The next few struck dirt. Then one struck the side of a dead tree with a satisfying thunk. Clara gasped. I did it. You did, Taza replied. And tomorrow you'll do better. Each success lit a fire in her. Each bruise, each blister, became proof that she could still become something more than what they tried to reduce her to. But not. All lessons were physical. At night, when the stars burned above the canyon and the fire crackled between them, Clara and Taza began to speak more openly. She told him about her students, little Ruthie Bell, who wanted to read every book in the world, and Thomas Lane, who kept a dead lizard in his desk as a pet. She laughed as she spoke of them, really laughed, and it felt like her ribs might crack from the unfamiliar joy of it. Taza, in return, told her about his family. His mother, who sang prayers into the wind. His younger brother, Nanton, who had died fighting the soldiers near the San Pedro. His father, once a proud leader, now a memory carved into stone. They tried to erase us, he said, eyes fixed on the flames. burned our villages, took our children, gave us numbers instead of names. Clara didn't speak. Her hand found his. He didn't pull away. There were moments of quiet intimacy neither of them fully acknowledged, like when she helped bind his arm after he cut it skinning a rabbit, or the way he gently tucked her hair behind her ear when it blew across her face. But neither of them crossed the line into something they couldn't return from. Not yet, because Clara had one focus: justice. And justice required strength, not distraction. One night, after days of tracking in silence and hard lessons, Clara stood alone at the canyon's edge, bow in hand. She took aim at a cactus 50 feet away. She breathed, released. The arrow struck the center of the stalk. She smiled. Taza, watching from the shadows, allowed himself the smallest of nods. "She's ready," he whispered to the stars. Far away, in Red Rock, Mayor Granger slept comfortably in his fine house, never imagining the girl he'd thrown away was alive. Stronger. Smarter. And coming back. The day began like any other in the canyon crisp air, a violet dawn stretching across the red stone, and Clara rising with fire in her limbs and purpose in her heart. But this day felt different. She could sense it in Taza's quiet tension. The way he kept glancing up toward the ridgeline, the way he stopped to listen more than usual. Clara was sharpening an arrowhead with smooth, practiced strokes when she finally said, "You feel something, don't you?" Taza didn't answer immediately. His dark eyes scanned the horizon. Then, quietly, "We are not alone today." Her pulse quickened. She stood, bow in hand, senses alert. They didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, the faint echo of hoofbeats bounced off the canyon walls, too faint for ordinary ears, but not for theirs. Clara ducked behind a rock ledge as Taza crouched beside her, his hand already on the knife at his belt. They watched as two riders moved slowly along the upper rim, scouting, searching. Clara recognized one of them instantly. Hold. One of the men who had dragged her from her cabin. The sight of him sent a cold, sharp feeling slicing through her gut. Not fear this time, but rage. She ducked lower, breathing hard, her knuckles white around her bow. "They're looking for a body," she whispered. "They want to be sure I'm dead." Taza gave a grim nod. "They'll find nothing but stone and silence." "But I want them to find me," she said. "I want them to know I lived. And I want them to answer for what they did." Taza turned to her, studying her face. "You are ready, but vengeance is not justice. What you seek must not destroy who you are." Clara looked away, the ache in her chest growing heavier. "They tried to bury me, Taza. They made everyone think I ran off or killed myself in shame. They'll keep doing it to other women, to girls, unless someone stops them." She paused, then looked at him, voice steady. "I have to go back." He didn't argue. Not this time. Instead, he reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a small, weathered necklace, an Apache talisman carved from bone and wrapped in thread. "My brother wore this when he died," Taza said. "Now it is yours." Clara took it reverently, her throat tightening. "I'll carry it with me. For both of us." That night, they sat by the fire, not speaking much. There was no need. They had spoken with their actions, their glances, their silence. They shared one last meal of roasted rabbit and corn cakes, and Clara rolled her map of the town flat across a stone table Taza had carved from the canyon floor. "I know the mayor's habits," she said, pointing. "He drinks at the saloon until nearly midnight. Holt and Paxton follow him like dogs. Miriam's still in town. She might help, if I can get a message to her." Taza nodded slowly. "And when they see you?" Clara looked up, firelight flickering in her eyes. "Then they'll see what survival looks like." The next morning, Clara wrapped her healing leg in a leather brace, tied her hair back tight, and fastened the talisman around her neck. She wore the Apache tunic Taza had given her, and slung the small bow over her back alongside a satchel of herbs and bandages. Before she mounted the horse Taza had prepared, she turned to him one last time. "Are you sure you won't come with me?" "I'll follow," he said, "from the ridges. No one will see me, but I'll see everything." She nodded, trying to hide the ache in her chest. "I'm not afraid." Taza stepped forward. "I know. But be careful, little hawk. Your enemies have sharp teeth, but deadlier still are the ones who smile." Clara leaned in and pressed her forehead to his, her hand resting against his chest. No kiss, no promises. Just breath, warmth, and truth. Then she rode out, leaving the canyon behind, the cliffs slowly swallowing Taza from view. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara reached the outskirts of Red Rock. She waited until full dark before slipping into the shadows behind the general store. Wrapped in a cloak and hood, she moved unseen. Only one lantern glowed in the distance, the one in Miriam's window. Clara crept close and gave a soft whistle. The curtain shifted. Seconds later, the door opened and Miriam stood frozen in disbelief. "Clara?" She breathed. Clara stepped into the light, pulling back her hood. "I'm alive," she said, "and I'm not hiding anymore." Miriam didn't cry, not at first. She just stood there, gripping the edge of the door as if the floor might fall out from beneath her. The oil lamp in her hand trembled, casting flickers of gold across Clara's face. Dirt still streaked her cheeks. Her tunic was torn at the shoulder. Her eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before, but she was alive. "My God." "Miriam," whispered. "They said you were gone." "I was," Clara replied softly, "but I came back." Miriam pulled her inside and shut the door, locking it with shaking hands. She set down the lamp, then turned and hugged Clara tightly, her body quivering from relief. After a long moment, she pulled back and looked her friend over. "You shouldn't be here," Miriam said. "If they find out, they will," Clara cut in. "That's the point." Clara sat at the kitchen table while Miriam poured hot coffee, her hands still trembling. Everything about the house felt too quiet, too still. The kind of stillness that only lives in a town afraid to speak the truth. Clara sipped the bitter brew and unrolled a crude map she'd drawn. "I need you to listen. We don't have long. I've got a plan." Miriam stared at the paper, then at Clara's face. "You're serious?" "I have to be. This can't just be about me anymore." Clara tapped the map. "The mayor's gotten away with this for years. Women disappearing, no questions asked. I have proof." From her satchel, she pulled out the names Miriam had seen before now, marked with locations, details, and suspicions. Clara had spent weeks piecing it together in the canyon with Taza's help. Every time the mayor had been humiliated, a woman vanished soon after. The pattern was sickeningly clear. "I want justice," Clara said, "but not just revenge. I want the town to know. I want everyone to see him for what he is and make it so no one can pretend anymore." Miriam sat down slowly. "How do you plan to do that?" "I need to show up where they least expect me." The next day dawned cold and gray, clouds gathering. Like a warning above the rooftops of Red Rock, the streets were muddy from a rare overnight rain. Most townsfolk stayed inside, but whispers had already started. "Someone saw a rider come in last night. Looked like a ghost. Wore Apache leather. I heard it was the Dawson girl's sister. No, someone said it was her." Mayor Granger laughed when he heard the rumors. "People see what they want to see," he told Paxton and Holt over whiskey. "Let 'em talk. Dead girls don't ride into town." But that evening, as the saloon filled with smoke and music, the front doors swung open, and Clara Dawson stepped inside. She wore her Apache tunic and the talisman around her neck. Her leg was braced, but she walked without fear. The room fell silent as chairs scraped and bottles clinked to a stop. Even the piano went still. Paxton dropped his drink. Holt stood slowly, mouth half open. Clara's eyes swept across the room and locked onto Mayor Granger. He turned pale. "Miss Dawson," he said, voice flat, controlled. "What a surprise." "No," she replied, stepping forward, her voice ringing. "The surprise is that you ever thought I wouldn't survive." She walked straight to the center of the saloon and pulled a bundle of folded papers from her satchel. Names, details, dates, testimonies. She turned to the crowd, holding them high. "I was thrown off a cliff because I wouldn't bow to this man. He had me dragged from my home in the middle of the night. They meant for me to die, but I didn't." She handed the first paper to the town's blacksmith, another to a rancher's wife, then to the preacher. She made sure the truth was no longer hers alone. Granger's face twisted with rage. "She's delusional. This is slander." "You're a coward," Clara said, turning to him. "You hid behind men like Holt and Paxton, too afraid to get your own hands dirty. But I know what you are." He lunged for her. Before anyone could react, a shape moved through the back door. Taza. Silent and sudden, like a shadow. He stepped between Clara and the mayor, blade drawn. The entire room froze. Granger stumbled back. "You brought a savage into my town?" "I brought justice," Clara said coldly. "The kind you've never faced." Outside, the townspeople had gathered. Word spread faster than fear. Clara stepped into the square, followed by Taza and Miriam. Holding her head high as the crowd looked on. Clara spoke again, louder now. "How many more women have to vanish before you stop looking away? How many have to die before you say enough?" The mayor burst through the saloon doors, gun drawn. A single shot cracked the air. Taza moved like lightning. The mayor's hand twisted with a sickening snap as his pistol hit the dirt. He screamed, falling to his knees. Clara stood over him, shaking, but she did not flinch. "You're done," she said. The mayor was dragged from his office. And Clara Dawson, who had returned from the dead, became the woman who broke a town's silence. The jailhouse in Red Rock had never seen a prisoner like Silas Granger. He sat in the corner cell, face bruised and twisted, wrist bound in a splint, and pride shattered. The once feared mayor no longer barked orders or flashed threats. Now he spat bitterness at the floor and cursed the names of those who had once feared him, names now turning against him. One by one, outside the barred window, the town buzzed with quiet unrest. News of Clara Dawson's return had spread like wildfire. People whispered her name in awe, in guilt, in shame. Some still refused to believe it, but others had begun to remember. Old accusations re-emerged. Stories that had been buried out of fear found breath again, and women, so many women, came forward. Widows, wives, daughters. Clara had torn a hole in the lie Red Rock had lived under for years, and the truth was pouring in. That night, under the stars, Clara stood on the church steps, surrounded by people holding lanterns and questions. Taza stood beside her, silent as ever, a looming presence that kept the mayor's remaining men at bay. Miriam passed out copies of Clara's written testimony. The preacher, once silent in the face of corruption, now held a Bible in one hand and a letter from a lost sister in the other. Clara stepped forward. "I was thrown from a cliff by men who thought silence would protect them. I survived because someone who should have been my enemy saved me. That alone should tell you everything about what's right and what's wrong in this town." The crowd remained quiet, but no one turned away. She continued, "I don't want your pity. I want change. I want girls to grow up in a place where saying no doesn't mean death, where truth isn't buried with the bodies of the brave." A woman in the crowd, gray-haired, stooped, raised her voice. "My daughter disappeared after refusing the mayor 3 winters ago. He said she ran off. I believed him." Clara met the woman's eyes. "I believe she didn't." The woman nodded slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. More voices followed. One by one, people came forward with memories, regrets, bits of truth. Red Rock, so long gripped by silence, was finally learning how to speak. Inside the jail, Sheriff Hodges paced nervously. He had been part of the system that enabled Granger, he knew that. But he also knew something had shifted. The people weren't looking the other way anymore. He walked to the cell, looked Granger in the eye. Town council's meeting in the morning. They want a vote. They're talking trial. Granger growled. I built this town. No, the sheriff replied. You owned it. There's a difference. Back at Miriam's house, Clara soaked her feet in warm water, exhaustion crawling through her bones. Taza sat nearby, mending the handle of her walking stick, his movements slow and deliberate. You did what most wouldn't dare, he said, not looking up. You faced death. Then you came back to face truth. I'm tired, she whispered. You? Can rest now, he said. She looked at him then, really looked at him, his weathered hands, his calm strength. In another world, they might have met differently, easier, gentler. But this was the world they were given. She moved closer. Will you stay? She asked quietly. He nodded. Until the earth says to move, she smiled faintly. Then you'll be here a while. The next morning, Red Rock's town square was full again. Only this time, it wasn't for a dance or a hanging, it was for a trial. The mayor was brought out in chains. Holt and Paxton had fled in the night. The people spoke, witnesses, victims, townsfolk long silenced, and Clara testified. Her words were calm, clear, and fierce. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Silas Granger would stand trial for attempted murder, abuse of power, and conspiracy. He wouldn't die at the end of a rope. But he would lose the one thing he'd held above all else, control. That evening, the schoolhouse bell rang again for the first time in weeks. Children ran down dusty streets, books clutched in small hands. Clara stood at the doorway, chalk in hand, and welcomed them back. She was no longer just a teacher. She was proof that a woman could be broken, buried, and still rise stronger. She had become something more. Not just a survivor, a reckoning. The sun rose slow and golden over Red Rock, spilling warm light across rooftops still damp with morning dew. The town, once held in the shadows of fear and silence, now stirred with something unfamiliar. Hope. Clara Dawson stood in the schoolhouse doorway as the children filed in, their laughter returning like birds after a long storm. She greeted them with a soft smile, her cane leaning beside the desk, her back straight despite the ache that still lived in her bones. She wore a simple dress, familiar but different. She was still herself. Just forged a new at the back of the room, one little girl lingered, her hand clutching a folded paper. Clara knelt with effort and opened it. A drawing stick figure standing on a cliff, one falling, one catching. The girl looked up and whispered, That one's you. Clara blinked back tears. Thank you, Ruthie. Outside, townsfolk worked side by side to repair the damage of years gone unspoken. Miriam helped board up the old saloon, while the sheriff and a few new deputies cleared out the mayor's mansion for evidence. The town council, once a gathering of men who bowed to power, now included women elected, not chosen. And at the edge of town, under the cottonwood tree by the riverbed, Taza stood in quiet reflection. He had not left, though he had said little about why he stayed. He simply remained. When Clara approached, he didn't turn. He seemed to sense her long before she spoke. I thought I'd find you here, she said softly. This place is quieter now, he said. Less lies in the air. Clara stood beside him, folding her arms. They're trying. It won't change overnight. But it started. You made it start. She glanced at him, voice low. I couldn't have done it alone. You weren't meant to." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Taza spoke again. "I will leave soon. When the time feels right. There is still pain in the world, and I am not finished walking through it." Clara nodded, her heart heavy but understanding. "And when you do, you'll come back?" He turned to her now, his eyes full of something deeper than any. "Promise. When you need me, I will come." They didn't kiss, not then. Not yet. But as the wind picked up and the leaves rustled overhead, Clara reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. That evening, as the town gathered for a harvest supper, a long table built down the main street, candles flickering in jam jars, Clara walked among the people who had once turned away. Now they met her eyes. Some with guilt, many with gratitude, even more with courage. Miriam raised her glass. "To the woman who wouldn't stay." Quiet. The townspeople echoed it. "To Clara." Clara raised her glass last. "To the ones who come after. May they never fear telling the truth." The toast rang out under the stars. Later, as the fire crackled low and the crowd thinned, Clara sat alone near the dying flames, thinking of all she had lost and all she had reclaimed. She was not the same girl who had arrived in Red Rock to teach reading and prayers to barefoot children. That girl had been naive, hopeful. Huldah, the woman who sat here now, had fallen from a cliff, tasted death, and returned. Not to survive, to live. Some said the town changed because of what she uncovered. Others said it changed because someone had the nerve to say no and survive the consequences. But those who knew better said, she was the girl they tried to kill to keep quiet, and the woman who came back to make them listen. And from then on, whenever girls in Red Rock stood up for themselves, when they spoke their minds or said no without fear, people whispered, "She's one of Clara's." Because Clara Dawson didn't just save herself. She changed the world around her, one truth at a time.